the hell's wrong with you people?
We're bad guys. It's what we do.
Suicide Squad has a lot more riding in its success than just being successful at the box office. As it has to function as a follow-up to Batman v Superman, its producers desperately needed it to restore faith in the franchise. So what ends up actually being the fundamental issue with this hurried attempt to course correct is that, as with the way Batman v Superman tried to respond to Man of Steel's criticisms, it feels like a childish knee-jerk reaction without any understanding of what the actual problems were. In this case, humour has been forced down the throat of the movie to the point where it stumbles around trying not to collapse under its own weight. Mind you, it would help if the movie was any good at things as basic as walking around. Yes, Suicide Squad is a calamity. No, it isn't without merit, but it's bad enough that I can confidently say that I am just done with this film series. The core issue with the film is the script. In case you're wondering, the script is basically the written version of the film, describing how scenes will play out, showing the dialogue, and essentially functioning as the skeleton of the movie. If I were to picture Suicide Squad's script, I don't feel like I would see your typical 180 pages of in-depth character interplay or world building, but rather a single sheet of paper dotted with a few bullet points. The result is a movie that comes across as an angsty 14-year-old thinking he could make a much cooler version of Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm usually against comparing films, but it's hard not to with Suicide Squad, what with the characters following incredibly similar beats, and also the same attempted use of pop songs. As easy as Guardians made incorporating a soundtrack look though, someone must have put a lot of time and effort into making sure that the right songs were chosen and placed correctly, with their editing coming out spot on. In this film, it just plays clips of songs at random points during character flashbacks. There's that word again. Character. We could have done with the guys making this film thinking about that word a little bit more. No one seems to be the main character or the lead of the film because it shifts from one character to another every 10 minutes. Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn is cringy and hard to watch, with people only loving her because she knows the superficial, and superficial really is the word for her character, elements of this fantastic comic book character. Will Smith is good enough to almost make you sympathetic for his character until you realise that he's inconsistent, incoherent and nonsensical. El Diablo has no role in the film, not interacting with any character at all, and then in the finale he starts using words like family to describe them all. Killer Croc has been created using some fantastic makeup effects, but he only has about 5 lines, which imply that he could have been maybe potentially interesting simply as a Batman villain, but not here. Slipknot and Captain Boomerang don't even get introductions from the film, so I refuse to put more effort into this review than Warner Brothers put into the film. Weirdly enough, Jai Courtney as Captain Boomerang is actually a fair bit of fun because he's not actually given a character, he just has a role as comic relief, which is actually 50-50 for. I get the impression from the movie that some of these people were supposed to be undergoing character development, but as someone who was watching the movie, all I noticed was people acting different at random points. There's a severe lack of growth, or scenes showing characters being more than simply cardboard cutouts. But what's the worst thing about Suicide Squad? Well, most of it is pretty terrible, but the most individually egregious element is the editing. Conveying the magnitude of how horrible editing is in a film without just showing you a clip is hard. So here's a clip.
What do we have here?
What are you gonna do? Are you gonna kill me, Mr. J?
What?
Oh, I'm not gonna kill you.
I'm just gonna hurt you. Really, really bad.
There is no context for that clip. It comes out of nowhere in the middle of the film with nothing around it and just happens, and then everyone moves on. That's what passes for a scene in this film. The horror of the editing goes beyond that, with the whole film turning into one massive pile of mush in terms of structure. If you're unfortunate enough to end up seeing this film, you'll probably have a watershed moment halfway through where you realise that stuff is happening without you noticing because it's impossible to ground yourself in any of these scenes. Wait, no, the editing isn't the worst thing about this film, the villain is. What I mean by that is, while the editing is one of the biggest flaws with the film, if not the biggest, the villain is what irritates me most. At this point in the insane domination by these superhero franchise films, why is it that we haven't had a good superhero antagonist since The Dark Knight in 2008, 8 years ago, not including Magneto? Here we get some ancient witch person played by Cara Delevingne who starts destroying the world in the first half an hour, and then the situation never changes between that point and the end of the film. Maybe that was to focus on the squad more without worrying about the villain, but when the witch is on screen, even for the little time she has, Cara Delevingne is the only person who actually descends into absolute horrendousness. She waltzes around waving her arms and swiveling her hips like she's constantly playing with an invisible hula hoop. Also, she's scantily clad in enough metal to cover your face. Not to mention that she turns people into her pawns by making out with them, because of course she does. They hired a model who can't act to play her, so they overtly sexualized her to the point of parody, except this isn't a parody. Let's establish before we wrap up that Suicide Squad is better than Batman v Superman. Still, most forms of torture are preferable to Batman v Superman. I want to finish this on a discussion of superhero movies in general. This is a genre that's perfect for Hollywood. You can make films of any type, style, or original premise, yet still sell them easily because of the massive fan community that these films have, and because your crazy trippy magic film is technically set in the same universe as your fun space romp. Yet we always come back to the same cliches, whether it's Marvel's Ant-Man being insanely derivative, X-Men Apocalypse being generic and bland, Civil War not knowing what it wants to be, Batman v Superman getting bogged down in franchise building, or Suicide Squad desperately scrambling to perform damage control. None of these superhero franchises have me interested at this point. They're convoluted, unoriginal, and thus unexciting. I'm a big believer in the idea of these films, and I love the source material most of them are coming from, but in the past 2 years they've just slid right down into a pit I'm not sure they can climb out of, especially considering how much money they're still making. As well as the fact that if you look at fan sites like Movie Pilot, you'll find insecure fanboys determined to like these films regardless of actual quality. Suicide Squad and Batman v Superman are bafflingly badly made films, with the former slipping from my memory with every second that passes. Yet they have genuine fan bases who declare proudly that they think the films are masterpieces. Not in the I enjoy it for what it is manner, but in the actual wasn't that so visionary and masterful kind of way. What superheroes have achieved is to transcend criticism by becoming these self-fulfilling successes purely by the nature of their place in pop culture. On one hand, that's insanely impressive, but on the other hand, out of 5 of these films that I've seen so far this year, I've only enjoyed 1 of them. That's far too poor a record for me to think that it's practical to keep these things around anymore.